Yeah, a brief overview of the World Bank. As most of you know, we are engaged with the client countries, mainly developing nations. And as the transport team, we focus on enhancing sustainable mobility and connectivity and reduce transport costs, improving infrastructure facilities, equipment services, and facilitate transport or port-led economic development. So besides expanding port capacity to enable improved modes of operation, an important part of the work in the World Bank is to support the development of institutions, government agencies, transport regulators, and port authorities in areas like project planning, development, management, financing, accounting, developing cost-based tariff, for example, and helping port authorities gain more autonomy from the government to encourage decision-making based on commercial principles and to develop them as more efficient institutions, providing the necessary regulatory and policy support for the development of the sector. So how do we do that? Well, most of these countries, as you know, they will have these national development goals. Our mission is to operationalize those development goals. And in the transport team, my job is primarily advising on strategy and development of critical infrastructure in the port and maritime space. Now, before we start that, we encourage or support the countries in looking at connectivity and a logistics master plan. This is very critical because in order to ensure connectivity to the hinterland gateway trade volumes and also their domestic supply chain, while ensuring that the urban and rural transport demands are managed efficiently. So this is the first step. And then we move into a national port strategy. We help the governments look at that. I had the pleasure of working along with Jonathan a few years ago in developing the national port strategy for Malaysia. We do likewise for many countries. And as I hear from the earlier panelists, the sector is, or the industry is going into a difficult phase where there's uncertainty of the volumes. So there is a lot of risk management to be done, and the scarce government resources needs to be deployed in the right places. So we really have upped our operations and our technical assistance in supporting countries in developing a connectivity and a logistics master plan. As you've seen again, in the time of COVID, many of these countries' supply chain got hit because they never had a fallback option in handling a pandemic-like situation. So all the more this agenda has taken more importance. And then, of course, we support the governments to look into the various trends in the ecosystem. We heard about digitalization, which is key. More importantly, we're looking at a growing middle class. Their spending is supposed to hit 64 trillion by 2030. So I'm more optimistic of the volumes coming back. Of course, we got to live with the trade disruptions and shifts, and eventually these volumes are expected to be back. We also have the challenges of ports needing to take in bigger vessels, not exactly ultra-large container vessels, but bigger vessels being deployed into intra-Asia trades or even small feeder lanes. And again, the larger volume throughput, putting challenges on port city interface and the smooth connectivity towards the key hinterland regions. So trend analysis is an important area where the bank works with through technical assistance. We support countries before we go into doing the advisory work on port development. So currently, what are we doing right now? Again, I think the panelists have clearly explained the importance of volume flows and the ports suffering in generating revenues. So our model is advising on an integrated development plan for these ports. When we look at whether it's Bangladesh or Indonesia, what we need to enable them or facilitate the government to generate volumes, gateway volumes, and this can only be carried out through an integrated development plan. So we look at the key sectors. We do a thorough sector review, identify sectors which need to be developed, whether it is fisheries or meat processing or agriculture or industrial segments. Through the sector review, we will flesh out what exactly is the vision for the port. This is exactly what is missing in many countries, because there has been a race to develop ports, which has been creating fragmentation of volumes, etc. So our approach to the going forward is to enable governments to develop gateway volumes, and an integrated port development plan is an important area that we are working on. As I mentioned, of course, we are a project financing bank as well, but more than that, we are not just a normal bank. We provide a lot of upstream work in terms of infrastructure, data trend analysis. We build capacity for the governments, for the authorities to build PPP units within the government sector. For example, a few years ago, we have helped the government of Timor-Leste to set up this PPP unit, and they could successfully operationalize this and get a private concessionaire to develop a brand new greenfield terminal in Timor-Leste. Again, I've talked about sector strategy and the feasibility studies, which are very critical before the governments put in a lot of money into these capital-intensive ventures. So how does it work? Our major focus right now is to mobilize private financing wherever the private sector could come in. So typically, when you look into the ports and terminals, you can see globally private terminal operators are present in almost all parts of the world. They are venturing into new markets, emerging markets. So there is always an availability or an interest from a private sector port operator to invest in terminal infrastructure. But what the governments need to do is to a little bit of hand-holding to prepare the projects. So through the engagement with the bank, that is what we are supporting. We develop a programmatic plan and a vision to develop the ecosystem and invite or facilitate private sector interests in bidding for these terminals. So as you can see, as you saw in the first slide, we also have group companies, organizations rather, IFC and MEGA. IFC in the debt and equity space for developing ports, and MEGA for risk guarantees and insurances as private companies venture into new markets. So this is in summary what the bank does, and thank you for this opportunity to be here today. And in fact, I'm enriched by the presentations from the panel and look forward to the Q&A.